we can. And by the way, put aside race, this obsession with race that wokeism has reinserted.
Well, invented even.
Invented in many ways.
Sam Seder and Emma Vigeland of The Majority Report talk about a clip where Jordan Peterson asserts that wokeism invented the obsession with race. Wow. So, I'm going to have some thoughts as we watch them discuss, and then I want to know what you think in the comments, but let's check it out together, shall we?
We have a clip of a brilliant Canadian.
Two brilliant Canadians.
Interviewing another brilliant Canadian who very well may be the next Canadian Prime Minister.
Very likely.
Are Canadian. I don't know Canadian history well enough to make an assessment of what is asserted in this clip. And so I wanted to ask you your thoughts. Here is Jordan Peterson speaking to Pierre Poilievre.
Poilievre, I think is
Poilievre. Sorry.
I can't get that one either.
Every kid I went to high school with was basically of French Canadian descent, but it was by that point it was all Worcesterized, so I had never had a problem. All right, go ahead.
Grateful again, and we're going to inculcate the values of gratitude for our incredible history, build up the country, celebrate what we have in common rather than obsessing about what divides us, focusing on the shared values that make us all Canadian. And
pause it for 1 second. Jeet, I have to ask you, is there concern amongst Canadians that their next prime minister does not seem capable of even looking into the eye of a guy he's getting interviewed with on television? Like, he refuses to even look at Jordan Peterson as he speaks to him.
Well, wouldn't you?
I'm
sure that stare is crazy as hell.
Oh, God.
That make us all Canadian. And I think in so doing, we can, and by the way, put aside race, this obsession with race that wokeism has reinserted.
Well, invented even.
Invented in many ways.
When I moved to Toronto, it was as race blind as any country, as any city could be.
Right.
Right. And that's flipped. And it's flipped because of that obsessive concern with race. Right. That was something we 100% did not need in Canada.
No.
Right. We basically, what would you say, imported and invented racism in Canada. Right. As a consequence of policy.
Wokeism did cease to divide people into these different groups and subgroups, and we see the results in a 250% increase in hate crimes. But we're going to get back to the basic principle that people are judged based on their individual character and humanity rather than by their group identity. And that is actually, ironically, the most unifying thing we can do to bring our country back together. And as
Jeet, this did wokeness invent racism in Canada? This is a fascinating dynamic.
And news to the Indigenous people who were slaughtered in Canada and then also put into re-education schools.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. No, I mean, there's I can sort of categorically say that this is not the case. I mean, obviously, the history of the Indigenous people is a major example, but also, I mean, there have been African people of African descent in Canada since at least 18th century, if not earlier, and along with sort of the pattern of segregation, ghettos. And other things as well. I mean, like in the 1930s, the Canadian immigration policy was to keep out Jewish immigrants, and the actual cabinet minister who was in charge of immigration in his diary said, in terms of letting Jews into Canada, none is too many. So in the context of a period where obviously there were many Jews who had legitimate refugee claims from Nazi Germany. Obviously Jordan Peterson is kind of talking nonsense. I will say that it is an interesting sort of
Wait, Jordan Peterson is kind of talking nonsense?
nonsense of a type that appeals to sort of centrist Canadians and not just right-wing ones. That I think that there's a kind of Canadian pattern of thinking like racism is an American thing, and this is like an American because Americans are very colorful in doing their racism. But I will say, in the 1920s when you had the Second Klan, some of the places where the Ku Klux Klan in North America had the highest density, where you had substantial 20-30% of the population that were like Klan members, was in Saskatchewan and Alberta in Canada, not just in the United States.
This logic is fascinating to me, though. It reminds me, it's analogous to when Trump said, we're not going to test, and we're not going to let them come in off the ship, because if they do, then the COVID's here. And it's the same, like they're basically saying, when the awareness of racism reared its head, it invented racism.
Basically.
When people started saying, hey, don't be racist, that's when the racism came.
Right.
It's like as soon as you name the thing, it exists, and it's almost like what's that book? The flying around the kids' book where they don't name Voldemort.
Oh, Harry Potter.
Yeah, like if we don't say his name, he doesn't exist. And then the moment you say it,
Well, I'm a nerd. That's not actually what was happening. Is Voldemort had a trace on his name, so if you said his name, he would immediately know where you are. But
he appears.
Right.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that is the basic idea. If we don't talk about racism, then it won't exist. I think the other thing, though, that maybe the conservatives here can benefit from, though, is that there has been sort of a rise of agitation, especially among Indigenous Canadians, on these issues. And I think that oftentimes the Liberal Party has kind of played lip service to this without actually doing anything. And so I think that there is a kind of pattern of sort of like frustration on these issues. So it's not. I think that the conservatives can profit from this, not just among appealing to racists, but maybe also more importantly, I think the liberal failure to address real social problems is gonna make people think like, well, okay, this guy he's at least has a different approach. Maybe that'll work.
That dynamic, I think, is also a problem in this country.
Yeah,
maybe we caught it from you.
And another instance, though, of a podcast with these right-wing leaders going on, Joe Rogan, Trump going on there talking directly to people, I think that helped him. Javier Milei was on Rogan. He went to Austin with his sister, who he's definitely not sleeping with. He's had to deny that many times. And that is the international cohesion of this right-wing project. I know you got to go, Jeet, but that's something we can flesh out another day. Doge is what Milei is doing in Argentina, where now poverty is over 50%, and it's been skyrocketing over the past year.
No, absolutely. No. There's a lot of international cohesion, and I actually think, it shows the weakness of the Liberals, which maybe is another Justin Trudeau and the Liberals, where I think we're seeing a broader kind of failure of centrist liberalism, both with Biden, Justin Trudeau, and I think Macron in France, and the Labour Party in England. But this is opening up a space for the far right. And what's kind of interesting is that Trump is talking about taking over Canada, and one would think that if you had a strong sort of center-left party, they could play the nationalist card, as Justin Trudeau's father, Pierre Trudeau, did brilliantly in the 60s and 70s by thumbing his nose at Nixon and opposing the Vietnam War. But Justin Trudeau has not been able to do that. And the contrast is, I think, with Sheinbaum in Mexico, who has responded to Trump saying, we're going to invade Mexico, as I say, to hell with you, try it, buddy. And, if you're going to raise the tariffs, we're going to raise the tariffs on you. So if you actually have a strong populist, left populist leader, I think they have the credibility to kind of like, stand up to this international right and to, like use a kind of like, what I see as sort of positive nationalism. Like, like let's stand up for Mexico. Let's stand up for Canada. But Justin Trudeau, I mean, it reflects the real weakness of the Liberal Party right now, that Justin Trudeau has not been able to do that.
Jeet Heer, National Affairs correspondent for The Nation magazine. Always a pleasure. Thanks so much for your time, man.
Oh, yeah.
It is interesting to hear from a Canadian about Canadian politics. There is a sort of a rightward swing going on up there, as well as in many places around the world. Jordan Peterson. Hey, let me know what you think in the comments.